Good evening, I'm Stephen Cummings, and welcome again to yet another edition of the Citizens Community Forum. Our program, as per every week, our objective is always to have an engaging and interactive session, as well as a civil discourse, and in so doing, help develop a culture of peace and understanding through citizens' participation. Our topics are also wide-ranging. Discussions at times may be emotionally charged, but surely we can always find common ground, irrespective of our differing views. This week and in the coming weeks ahead on the Citizens Community Forum, we will be doing quite a bit of reflection on many issues and many areas of national life in Trinidad and Tobago. We are coming to the end of 2022, a year some may describe as turbulent in many aspects, so on many fronts. But as we reflect on this passing year, we also have to examine what our future prospects could be. One of the many issues that has formed the national conversation and that which have impacted us here in Trinidad and Tobago has been, we've seen some developments in Tobago, the island of Tobago. With the new administration and at the helm, the THA, after what could be described as the breaking of a 20 to 21 year political stranglehold on the assembly by one political party, the call for change resonated with many Tobagonians, as was reflected in the election results, and we saw 14-1. That's part of our history now. This was not the only issue. A small, economy largely dependent on tourism also had its troubles. Coming out of the economic lockdowns, we have that we've had. Crime also continued to be a major factor, with the continuous call for new approaches for dealing with crime and criminality. And then we had the business of, the business sector feeling the pinch of the global pandemic. We have all, been talking about the state of Tobago, and any issue is never really an old issue, in that such can be raised and revisited at any time, especially when those issues impact the political, administrative, economic, and social life of an economy or a people. We will also be speaking with many leaders in the society to get their perspectives on where we have been, where we are now, and perhaps what they hold out for us for the future, 2023 and beyond. In this segment, we are talking Tobago. Our topic: reflections, challenges, and perspective on the future of the THA. And sitting in with us, no stranger to our airwaves, is Mr. Martin George, who would help us discuss, some of these issues as we bring 2022 to a close. Just in a matter of weeks. One may ask, why the discussion about Tobago? Is it relevant? Well, my answer can be simply that, whatever impacts on Tobago is simply, impacts on the unitary state of Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. George, good evening to you, and welcome again to the program.
Yes, hi, good evening to you, Stephen, and good evening to all your listeners and all your followers on social media.
It's a pleasure to have you once again. Mr. George, I couldn't let the year close without, getting you in back on the program as, we continue our discussion on, what's the state of the economy, Trinidad and Tobago in the main, but more specifically at this time, Tobago. There's a lot of issues we want to pack into this hour. We have, as I mentioned, there are challenges, that are facing us. The business sector, the revitalization of the tourism sector, health, wellness, resolving issues of land tenure as well. I think that has been an issue that was raised in the early parts of the year. Safety and security, crime and criminality, remuneration to suppliers, the inter-island travel, there are so many issues. But I wanted to start out the discussion, Mr. George, by first, looking at this burning issue that I suppose we are coming to the end of the year and we haven't really moved the needle. And that has to do with the autonomy for Tobago. That has been a discussion that we've been having for Some may say since Jesus was a little boy. Let's start there. I mean, we have to be able to get a view, a perspective as to where we are going, and specifically the discussion, is going to be focusing on Tobago. Is Tobago really ready for autonomy? And I'll ask you the question again. I may have asked you this already, but I'll ask you again. And be able to really administrate its own affairs. For some, this might be a bit of a head scratcher, Mr. George, having regard to what has recently been emerging within the current executive of the THA.
And that's exactly the point, Stephen. The fact of the matter is that this was a little test for Tobago. In other words, okay, all right, you say you want to change, you want to run your own affairs, you want to see how things go. So there was a change of administration. There's nothing wrong with that. But look at what has happened since then. So one would ask the question, if you were to give Tobago full autonomy, full independence, what would really happen in such a circumstance? Is it going to be that every Monday morning you're going to be having a bloodless coup with a new person popping up and saying, well, I am leader, I am king for the day or king for the week? And, you have this constant change, because this was supposed to be a situation where, as you pointed out, 14-1. So in other words, you have a clear, solid majority. There's nothing to disrupt you. There's nothing to challenge you, or nothing to, make you feel weakened or, lacking the authority and power to be able to govern and rule. And yet still, you see internally these fractures occurring, whereby you basically have a situation where it's almost like two man rat trying to live in one hole. And of course, we know that is an untenable situation. So it really raises questions as to the overall goal of autonomy. In other words, are we going to end up in a scenario such as Haiti? If you remember, Haiti historically was the first Caribbean island to gain independence, because you had the revolution, led by Toussaint Louverture and
yes.
His supporters. And the fact of the matter is, you look at Haiti now, 200 years later, Haiti still has not found its feet. Is this the fate that Tobago wants for itself? In other words, you've gotten the liberty, the independence, but you don't know what to do with it. And 200 years have passed and you still can't get yourself organized and get yourself, in some sense of gear to move forward. Haiti is still listed as the poorest nation in the Western Hemisphere. In the entire Western Hemisphere. So, it's like a scenario where you have a dog chasing down a car. You ask yourself, when he catches the car, what is he going to do with it? You don't have a clue what you're going to do with it. When you might walk around it, you might pee on the tires. Apart from that, what else do you do usefully? So I think that it really makes us give pause to stop and reconsider, okay, this whole idea of autonomy for Tobago, all right, what do we plan to do with it? How do we plan to manage it and navigate it? Because in other words, power can be a two-sided sword. In other words, it can cut both ways. You can have it that you use, yes, against your enemies, but the other side can cut against you yourself. So therefore, you need to be able to manage it and control it in a way that it is productive and constructive going forward. And I'm not sure we have shown yet in Tobago that level of maturity and responsibility to be able to say, look, we are ready for full autonomy.
You mentioned and you referenced Haiti, Mr. George, and I know that when we sit and we look at the history of Haiti, Haiti has had a history of instability, political instability, and we've had assassinations. I'm not sure how many assassinations, but I know at least we have had at least two assassinations. When we look at the long history of Haiti. In the political fray, more recently, the president who held, and I think there's still a case that is going on there. But we have had, we've had assassinations, within or from, within or from, and it does not augur well, as you reference, for it tells you what happens and what can happen in a state of instability, so that I suppose some of us who are a little more peaceable in other parts of the Caribbean can learn from what, because we don't have to reinvent the wheel, Mr. George.
Exactly.
That's a terrible wheel to reinvent. Yeah.
Yes, exactly, and that's my point. So I mean, the thing is, it's really unfortunate what has transpired, and of course, there are questions that are arising now because there is the political dynamic, there's the legal dynamic, there's the social dynamic in Tobago. In other words, if it is that politically you are no longer a part of the vehicle which you entered office with, which would have been based upon, I guess, their constitution, their, coming to the public and saying, listen, vote for this party because this is what the party represents, their manifesto, their promises, their, what they would have put out in the public. Then if you say, look, I'm no longer a part of that, then who are you a part of? Whom do you represent? And that's what we are not hearing. And I think sooner or later, we need to hear from them.
Apart from the discussion that we have from time to time when we talk about a crisis in leadership, is this a crisis in identity? Knowing who you are and what you represent, Mr. George.
I think it really is. I think it is an identity crisis at this point. And I mean, thankfully, we were in the midst of the festive season and we're heading into Carnival. So maybe these things will serve as useful distractions. But the reality is that Tobagonians need to have some clear sense of knowing who is in charge, who are we following, basically. It cannot be for the next 4 years or next 3 years, you're telling me I'm following 14 independents.
Okay.
All right. Even among the independents, then what is to happen? If they themselves decide to fracture, if different persons have different ideas, what is the guiding philosophy? What is the overarching strategy? What is your constitution? What is your guiding principle? The people need to know.
Right. Again, very important. And this is the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings. I'm talking with Mr. Martin George, and our topic: reflections, challenges, and perspectives on the future of the THA. One in several topics, social national issues that we are going to be dealing with in the coming weeks as we bring the year 2022 to a close. Mr. George, we have been hearing as well that strong call, and I think you kind of referenced that a little earlier on, for elections yet another time. But, this obviously, I'm wondering, for what purpose this might be, because, I mean, I think we have become kind of election wary. We've had several elections within such a short period of time, and I'm not sure if Tobagonians, as we focus on Tobago, would welcome an election at this time. I've heard it, from on the ground.
Well, of course, Mr. Duke is agitating. He's the chief agitator for the new elections, and I mean, one can clearly understand why, because at this point he thinks that he is
disenfranchised. Yes.
Yes, he has nothing to lose if elections are called. On the other hand, Mr. Farley Augustine and his team, they feel, well, listen, we are already in the seat of power. Why should we give that up to risk the chance of elections if we are not guaranteed that we are going to win and come back? So, I cannot see that call finding fertile ground with them, but it's going to end up at the end of the day being a question of, okay, what does the public call for? In other words, if there is a growing momentum and growing sentiment from the public that, hey, listen, you guys need to go back and get a fresh mandate, get proper validity for this leadership that you are having, then, of course, those calls could eventually, I guess, reach what is called the tipping point, as described by the author Malcolm Gladwell, in his seminal treatise on the subject. Whereby it's so overwhelming that maybe Mr. Farley Augustine and his followers may not be able to avoid it. But I'm not sure it's anywhere close to that at this stage.
All right. And there remains some gray areas, even in my mind, Mr. George, after months, some are still unclear as to whether Duke's resignation was on solid legal constitutional grounds, and even how those resignations, even within the executive that we've seen just recently, how those are actually, impacting on the running of the business of the people. Are the people, is it that they understand exactly the implications of these things, and then again, sometimes I feel that there is this deficit in public education. I don't know if there's any such thing as a school of politics, but I mean, you can go to university and study political science, but we're talking about the school, a school of thought. Is it that you believe that there needs to be more public education? And we're not talking about, people coming from universities and using the big language that are really not understood by the normal man in the street.
Well, Stephen, exactly what you see you and I are engaging in here, this is part of the public education process. And that's why I always try as much as possible to facilitate invitations to appear on these shows, to share ideas, knowledge, experiences. It doesn't mean that people always have to agree with what I say or necessarily accept what I say, but once I can stimulate thought, I can stimulate discussion, I can stimulate people to think, to say, well, hey, listen, maybe we need to look at this issue, one way or another, look at it through a different lens, then that's part of the education that we need to keep providing on a consistent basis for our citizens. Because if not, they will only be schooled through the narrow political lens of each political party and what they want their followers to say, think, or believe. And that's not good enough for Trinidad and Tobago. We must be able to have persons who can present an objective, unbiased, balanced view so that people can say, hey, listen, let me weigh the options and let me come to a decision for myself.
All right, and we are talking the business of Tobago. I'm Stephen Cummings. Our topic, reflections, challenges, and perspectives on the future of the THA. And as I said before, this is one in several topics that we will be discussing, we'll be talking about in the coming weeks. We hope to get many of our leaders in to discuss, where we are as a country. And I know that we are quickly getting to the end of 2022, and what a year it was. I mean, we can look back and reference, all the challenges and with the pandemic, and I think COVID-19 is still with us, even though, there have been some drastic moves towards, getting back to a state of normalcy. But that's probably for another program. Mr. George, as a key stakeholder within, Tobago and the Tobago Business Chamber, and, as we reflect on the business sector on the island, what would you say has been the real impact on business coming out of the last 2 years? Now, I know that several of the other chambers, even here in Trinidad and Tobago, have been talking about what went by, and some have been very optimistic, and some have been quite opposite as to where we might be going. Having had that hit, for the last 2 years.
Yeah, well, the thing is, Stephen, we are all still trying to climb out of this hole, basically, just to get back to zero. That's the reality. Yeah. And this current political imbroglio is not helping at all. It's the last thing you needed. Because once you have political instability, of course, that's never good for business. Then you are hearing concerns about checks being issued by the THA. Yes. Some persons said that they were not honored by the banks. Of course, the THA then later gave an explanation. We're not sure what exactly is the real scenario there. But the fact of the matter is that there are some concerns that are swirling around, and we are hoping that going into the new year, these will be addressed, because you have lots of contractors still complaining that they've not been paid. Then, on the other hand, you have lots of new contracts that people have claimed were given to contractors in Trinidad, while a lot of the Tobago contractors remained unpaid. And you're wondering, well, if you have the money to give out new contracts, then why aren't you honoring the existing obligations? Then there was the explanation that, well, it had to be vouched and surcharged and verified in terms of the work done. And there's nothing wrong with that. But the fact of the matter is that process is not supposed to take forever. So one way or the other, you ought to start seeing payments being made to your existing liabilities before you go incurring even more liabilities.
Additional, yes.
Yes, and that's a concern that people are still discussing. I think there was a forum last week where that was front and center. So I think that there's definitely the need for there to be a more communicative and interactive process from the current leadership of the THA in terms of explaining and meeting the people and letting them know what is happening. Because if you isolate yourself, then you only make yourself even more of a target for the animosity, the resentment, the discontent of the masses. If you recall, in the French Revolution, right? If you recall, when Marie Antoinette, in her famous words or infamous words, when she was so isolated and disconnected from the people that she couldn't even understand what her staff were telling her when they said, "Ma'am, my lady, the peasants, they are rioting, because they have no bread." And her answer was, "Let them eat cake," because as far as she's concerned, well, yeah, you don't have bread here, you must have cake. The fact of the matter is that was not even a contemplation for them. And it appears that the current executive of the THA, they are slowly pitching themselves into this scenario where they're painting themselves into a corner from which there is going to be no escape when the reckoning of the public comes to meet them to say, "Hey, listen, we need answers." So I think they need to come down from there, as the local artist, the Trinidad artist sings, and he says, "Come down from there," basically, if I could be permitted to use the local parlance, and understand that, okay, yes, you've been elected to office, but don't assume these airs where you feel that you are so superior, you are so, immune to everything, that you don't need to answer or account to the people, because those things eventually come back to haunt you.
I know, as you mentioned that, I remember, reading a book many years ago, by George Orwell. And I wouldn't want to go into the details, but persons who are familiar with that.
That's Animal Farm.
Yes, Animal Farm. Yes, George Orwell.
Napoleon, Snowball, Boxer. Yes.
And it tells us, it gives us a picture of, what can happen, and in the center of power.
True a depiction, Stephen, because if you recall in the story, the same things that they criticized in the previous leaders, those are the very things that they themselves assumed as their own posturing and their own behavior, and then
irony,
chastised the public for that.
Steep in irony. This is the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings. We are talking the business of Tobago, and our topic, reflections, and giving a perspective on where we are and where we've been and where we could possibly be in the future. As I said before, we are bringing 2022 to a close, and this is just one in several topical areas that we will be addressing in the next few weeks on the Citizens Community Forum. Mr. George, we have to also mention the issue of money, and I looked at the last budget. Tobago would have gotten 2.5 billion to manage its affairs over the next year, representing some 4.3% of the $57.6 billion national budget. Now, the new PDP-led THA, we were told, wanted some 3.97 billion, but they did not get it. Finance Minister Colin Imber did say that, what the THA got was in keeping with their responsibility under the 6th schedule of the THA Act. And in fact, what the finance minister may have been saying is that the new administration should not be complaining.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, the thing is, I mean, of course, you always have the question of when the party in charge of the THA is the same or a different party from the one that is in central government. What you always have, and I mean, it's actually, almost embarrassing the way it occurs, is that when you have the same party in control of the THA and in control of central government, whatever is doled out by central government, you always have the obsequious bowing and scraping and the, gratitude being offered for thanking them for giving you whatever they chose to give you. Whereas if there's a different party in the THA, controlling the THA as opposed to who is in central government, you always have the complaints that, look, they have not given enough, you cannot work with this, it is inadequate, insufficient, and that this is an attempt to victimize Tobago. So it's a parody that keeps playing itself out year after year after year. And one of the things that I have always suggested, Stephen, is because I always like to provide solutions, and I have suggested that Tobagonians need to start thinking outside the box. They need to start thinking outside of this annual handout exercise which they engage in. Of course, yes, you need the subvention from central government.
Central government, yes.
But separate and apart from that, what are you doing to generate your own finances, your own resources?
Which is something we're going to get into a little later on. Yes, self-sustenance and being able to be creative and innovative in that sense. Because one of the reasons I asked that question, Mr. George, is that sometimes I tend to think that the finance minister talked about the act, the THA Act, and the 6th schedule, so that we are always governed by laws and regulations. And I think sometimes the law can be used. I mean, you are an attorney. Sometimes the law can be used in so many different ways. Sometimes it may mean justice to one person, and then at another person it may mean injustice.
And to some others, it's a four-legged animal.
I hear you, Mr. George. What we'll do at this time, Mr. George, we will take a short break, and when we come back, we will continue the discussion. I'm Stephen Cummings. I'm talking with Mr. Martin George. We are reflecting on Tobago and looking at where we are, where we've been, where we'd like to be in the future, 2023 and beyond, reflecting as we are at this time. Mr. George, we take a short break and come right back.
Thank you.
The University of the West Indies has the capacity to generate its own funding, or at least part funding. Is that what I'm getting from you?
Yes, Stephen, thank you very kindly. You have put it in a precise language. If they have been doing that, it is to a minuscule extent.
Somebody tried to ask me, so what do you want? I said, brother, the video good. Sometimes, even as a person, you ain't sure what you want, but you're absolutely sure what you don't want. And workers are absolutely certain that this 2% that is on offer is an insult.
2% over an 8-year period and tell your boy you're going to do it, things are hard. No. Are we living in a different Trinidad and Tobago? And that is what we have to discuss.
Discussion on health, leadership, governance, crime, education, and social justice. Every Wednesday, 8 to 9 p.m., the Citizens Community Forum. Your host, Stephen Cummings. And welcome back to the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings, and we are talking about the business of Tobago, and this being the closing days or a couple of weeks, before we get into the new year 2023, and our topic reflections and looking at where we are, where we'd like to be, and where I suppose where I suppose, things that we have done, and looking for, solutions, looking also for different views, perspectives as to how we can have a better society, a better Trinidad and Tobago, more specifically, as we're focusing on Tobago at the moment. Mr. George, welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
Before we went to the break, we were talking about, this issue where there seems to be this disconnect, and I wanted to touch as well on the issue of representation, whether, we should be looking at things such as the power of recall, because we're looking at the betterment of people and their social standing. I heard a comment at one time, or even within the, let's say, the unitary state, if you look at Trinidad more specifically, and you look at institutions, there are so many acting positions, Mr. George, to just, reference an example. So we have the acting this and the acting that, whether you want to, focus on the police.
The acting commissioner of police, the acting deputy commissioner of police, the acting.
Yes, we seem to be, we are fashioning Hollywood, or maybe, I don't know, but, we seem to have had a lot of actors and actresses, in different sectors. I'm thinking that, in terms of being able to, as we're reflecting on where we have been as a country and where we are now, I'm thinking whether, we should seriously be looking at things that, power of recall, I think, was one, the proportional representation was another thing that was raised very, very early and continues to be, part of the national conversation. How can we bring ourselves, or what can we do to really, impact on improving that business of representation?
Well, the thing is, the fact that there has never been the agreement or consensus on proportional representation, that in itself speaks volumes. And I'll tell you why. When the parties are in opposition, they love to call for proportional representation, because it means that in those circumstances, they would get a share in the say on governance.
The spoils, share of the spoils.
Right. But when they are in government, they love the first past the post system, because it means winner takes all, loser gets nothing. And that's what they love. So the fact of the reality is that it's really a spurious and specious argument that they mount each time only when it suits them. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense for them, and therefore they don't support it. So therefore, I am not sure we are ever going to see that come to the fore, because unless you have some kind of agreement where basically somebody's going to agree that, look, hey, I am going to willingly give up part of the power that I have won, then that's not going to happen. And in Trinidad and Tobago, we know our politicians, they don't give up anything. In fact, they don't even like to give up office at all. The only time you see them demitting offices when you have, them being carried out by 6 pallbearers, to end up 6 feet down. That's the only time they, appear to willingly give up office.
But doesn't that go against what we like to term Westminster style of governance, Mr. George? I've seen, and you've seen and read, that sometimes for the littlest of issues, you have prime ministers saying, well, I'm calling it a day. I haven't.
We've seen it in the UK in recent times, There
have been several prime ministers in the last 5 to 6 years in Britain.
Where, persons have recognized that, hey, listen, the will of the people indicates that I am not favored, so therefore I will do the honorable thing, and I will demit office. But the point is, we follow the Westminster tradition in principle only, but not in actual reality. Our politicians do not go anywhere. They dig in their heels. We've seen so many examples of it where you have flagrant abuses, flagrant wrongs committed by our politicians. You have videos circulating of politicians allegedly smoking marijuana in rooms with young girls, and they look at the video, they look at their faces on the video, and they come out in the national space and say, it wasn't me. Shaggy could make a mint, with his song with our local politicians, because they look straight in the face of the evidence and they come out with these denials and say it wasn't me. So we have actually turned the Westminster principles on their heads in the sense that where we should be doing the honorable thing, we actually opt always for the dishonorable choice.
All right. Again, so there isn't that follow on. We talk about Westminster and all the other trappings, but when it comes to really, I suppose, taking responsibility, personal responsibility, and owning up, this is what I'm getting from you. We don't seem to want to go into those into those territories, because I suppose of what being in power means. I mean, with all the trappings and whatever. I guess again, maybe we have to define what Westminster really is or should be in our own local context here, political context here in Trinidad and Tobago. But I wanted to sort of touch as well, Mr. George, on but just before I say that, just want to remind our listeners that this is the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings, so we are talking the business of Tobago. Our topic reflecting on where we are, where we have been, where we'd like to go, and of course we are coming towards the end of the new year 2022, and we will be talking with a number of our leaders within the society, talking about different getting different perspectives on where we are as a country. Just dealing with the issue of crime and criminality among young persons, and that continues to be among the social cancers, not just on Trinidad, but Tobago as well. And I'm wondering what else can be done to really surgically treat with this issue. Now, you are an attorney, Mr. George, and you would obviously have been witness to both sides, that the side of justice and the side of injustice. And when it comes to young people, what do you think can be done in addition to what we have already done? I mean, we can list a lot of programs that some people tell you don't seem to be really working. The MyLats and I'm hearing now that they are thinking of bringing back the youth camps. What else in your mind can be done? Because to do an anecdotal kind of look at the statistics, it would tell you, and I mean, I did an unscientific poll and some research, and it told me that the most amount of crime that is committed have been, are among young people.
Yes, yes. And the thing is, what's interesting about that, Stephen, is that there is a tremendous disconnect between these young persons and the acts that they might commit and the consequences of their actions. So, in other words, it seems that they don't even recognize the gravity of the offenses that they may be committing. And that's the frightening part of it. So in other words, you can get a teenager, you give him a gun, you send him out to do a job, to kill somebody, he does it, and he doesn't recognize that this is a life. This is a human being. This is a father, a brother. This person will have children. They will have relatives. They'll be. This person could have been a breadwinner for the family.
Yes.
They
maybe even a prime minister. Maybe even a president. Yes.
This is the point. I mean, look at what we heard about in terms of Guyana and this plot over the weekend.
The violence. Yes.
So So the thing is, that's the scary part of it, because in other words, it's basically like you are arming robots, unthinking, unfeeling, unemotional. So therefore they can do anything, and in their minds there is no reckoning, no responsibility, no consequence. And that's the scary part of it, because in other words, in those circumstances, there's nothing that operates as a check and balance to your behavior and to the extent of what you are willing to do.
Right. Again, but is it that we are seeing this business of crime and criminality being a reflection among young persons, really being a reflection of the society, and even persons who hold important offices, Is that a reflection? Because, you know, I heard there's another side of it as well, which I would address shortly. But I just wanted, you know, to get your response on that. Is it a reflection of the society, of who we are as a people?
Well, you know, the interesting thing is that, you know, the police service, they are always the first ones to say, listen, the criminals and the criminality, they are both reflections of the society. And they admit it. They come out and they say it. So if they are the experts and they are saying it, who am I to say differently? But the fact of the matter is, Stephen, is that we cannot accept this as our permanent reality going forward. In other words, we must be able to say, hey, listen, okay, even if this is the present situation, then okay, what are we doing to change it? What are we doing to change the dynamic? Because we can't simply throw our hands up in the air and say, well, you know, it's all bad, or the sky is falling like Chicken Little. We have to be able to say, hey, listen, how are we going to start to redress this? How are we going to start to change our course? Because, you know, part of having hope, part of having belief, part of having faith is to understand and appreciate that even though you are facing the darkest night, there's a possibility of the breaking dawn with a new light, new hope, new vision. And that's what Trinidad and Tobago needs right now. So I am hoping that as we turn the corner from 2022 into 2023, that there is a reawakening of that spirit of hope, joy, peace, understanding, and tolerance among us as Trinbagonians, so that we can each and every one in our own way do our part to start lighting that light. You know, Stephen, you know, if you look at a crowd with candles, and one person shares a light, shares to another one, shares to another one, shares, you know, after a while you have thousands of lights lighting up the entire space, and it becomes a beautiful glow.
Yes.
You know, and just by you doing your part, and that's all I think we need to focus on, because we can't try to solve the entire big problem by ourselves.
Yes.
But each in our own little way, once we start doing what we could and doing what is good, I think we can start to change Trinidad and Tobago.
But, you know, it's interesting that you mentioned that. I think that is what the Archbishop, Roman Catholic Archbishop of Port of Spain, Charles, you know, Jason Gordon, talked about. We had just recently, I think it was in the last weekend, a National Day of Prayer, reflection, I think it was also called. And there was this strong, you know, call from many of the religious leaders to have that very same thing that you have just mentioned there, to have that light and that glow. But what was also interesting as well, a statement that came from the Archbishop, he's saying that coming out of 2 years or almost 3 years of a pandemic, there is he referenced a kind of trauma in the society that he sees, you know, being played out in the streets, and especially among young people, and not just crime from the point of someone, you know, getting involved in robbery and what have you, but there's a kind of disrespect as well, you know, for humanity, in the sense that we don't seem to be a courteous people as we should be. And, you know, he went back to talking about the olden days and you know, what our grandmothers used to tell us, and how we should be neighborly and what have you. Do you believe that the trauma that coming out of, especially of the almost 3 years, you know, has had an impact on the kind of violence that we've seen?
I'm not sure it's necessarily just linked to the COVID pandemic. I think we were well on our way to that long before that, you know. And I mean, if I were to trace anything as the seminal and defining moment in Trinidad and Tobago's history, I would say the events coming out of the 1990 coup indelibly changed the face of Trinidad and Tobago. Stephen, if we look back and we trace back, you'd recognize the influx of guns, illegal arms, ammunition, all of those things. From then, it never looked back. It always increased from then. So that, I think, has been the watershed moment in Trinidad and Tobago's history, from which we never were able to actually
Recover.
take stock of ourselves, pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and say, hey, listen, we need to put a stop to this. We need to, put a check mark. We just allowed things to spiral out of control. So, of course, maybe the pandemic emphasized or aggravated or magnified things, but certainly we were well on that downward spiral long before the pandemic. It had nothing to do with the pandemic in terms of, saying that that's the root cause of it. It may have been exemplified and magnified then, but certainly Trinidad and Tobago has been on this downward trajectory for several decades now.
All right, and that's an unfortunate, place to be. But in addition to that comment that I heard from the Archbishop, even the acting Commissioner of Police, McDonald Jacob, was before a joint select committee of Parliament just a few days ago, before going on vacation. He talked about one of the questions that was asked of him is that, the state of crime in Trinidad and Tobago, where are we, how is it that we have been brought to the state of having, this large proliferation of guns and ammunition and what have you. And he talked about transnational organized crime. And I get the sense, Mr. George, that I don't know if it was passing the buck or looking to blame some other entity or agency or person or country, but I get the sense that he was very concerned more so about transnational organized crime, meaning that what we may be experiencing here in Trinidad and Tobago, we might be, pushing against the tide, and we may have to find some other way of treating with our own situation. I tend to kind of get the impression, as well as I said, that his focus was more so on what is happening outside as impacting on Trinidad and Tobago.
So the thing is, Stephen, in a scenario like that I can only describe as a cop-out, no pun intended. Because the point is, what you're basically saying, we are a small cog in a big wheel of international conspiracy and international criminal activity. Yes, that's fine, and we don't doubt that. But however, your remit is to ensure that within the borders, within the territory of Trinidad and Tobago, that you make our space safe and our place safe. So if you are not doing that, then you are failing. End of story. That's how I assess it and analyze it. So regardless of whether the causes are external, internal, whether they're transnational, multinational, regional, whatever you want to describe it, the fact of the matter is, having identified the problem, then you need to solve it. That's why you are there. That's why you are aspiring to be the permanent appointee as Commissioner of Police.
But that's another topic.
To give the facile and puerile excuses does not, in my estimation, do any justice to your aspirations for the post at all. Because, in other words, while you are good at identifying the problem, you need to also be able to identify the solutions.
All right. Well, he did say that that there are systems in place to really respond to what's happening and what's impacting on Trinidad and Tobago. And even before that, he referenced the point that, listen, Trinidad and Tobago has now been used or continues to be used as this jump-off point, this transshipment point, and we've been hearing that for decades. And the question is always.
And I'll tell you, even just by definition, I'm sorry to make this point, but I have to. If you are saying that Trinidad and Tobago is a transshipment point, then let the shipment go on its way. How the hell the drugs and guns are ending up in Trinidad and Tobago? If we are transshipment point, just by the very definition of that terminology, it doesn't make sense what we are being told, because transshipment means that, look, you basically it's just passing through. Right?
Yeah.
If it's passing through,
but there's a stop off somewhere. There's a stop off somewhere.
So therefore, clearly, it's not a transshipment point. It's been a destination.
It's a destination, and that's what I was getting to.
Guns and drugs are being offloaded here and being used here in Trinidad and Tobago. So I reject that argument.
And that's the point I was getting to. And you know, together with that, as we, you know, we're reflecting on, on Trinidad and Tobago. This is the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings. I'm talking with Mr. Martin George. Our focus is really on Tobago. But of course, as I said before, you know, what impacts on Tobago impacts on Trinidad, what impacts on Trinidad impacts on Tobago. There was also this view, not a view, but a fact that there are serious concerns about the ports, you know, the port of entry. I even heard officials from the port saying that, listen, we are understaffed and they haven't had the kinds of, you know, technology, the use of the technology, so that we've had this issue perennially over and over again. But again, it calls for, I suppose, not just the political will, but more so, I suppose, for people to do what they have been paid for.
Well, not just that, Stephen. The fact of the matter is that, you know, we are at a technological disadvantage because we are not making use of the best and the latest technology in terms of scanning the containers or ensuring that, you know, you do your full checks and balances in terms of the stuff that is landed at our legal ports of entry.
Yes.
What makes it worse and what exacerbates the problem is that you have the TTPS telling us repeatedly that the majority of illegal guns and drugs come in through the legal ports of entry. So in other words, for you to be able to say that, that means you must have your statistics.
Yes.
You must have your evidence to show that. So in other words, you must know that, look, yes, these illegal things came in through this legal port of entry.
He did make that point, Mr. George. He said he had solid data. I remember that very clearly.
My question is, where are the arrests that follow from this solid data? And that's the rubbish that the TTPS keeps foisting upon the nation. So in other words, they will tell you that, oh, they have information that there are 162 gangs in Trinidad and Tobago. They'll give you very specific numbers. So then why the hell don't you go out and arrest them? If you know so much and you have such a specific number, then that means you have already identified where the gangs are, who the members are. Then what on earth are you doing except coming and parroting these numbers to us and telling us, well, yes, these are the numbers of gangs and these are the amount of contraband items passing through the illegal ports. So then who are they consigned to? You must have the paperwork, the documentation. Where was it shipped from? Who was the shipper? Who's the invoicee? Who paid for it? Who's supposed to receive it? You know? Or you mount a sting operation and you say, okay, right, this one here, we know that there are illegal guns in it. Let's wait and see who's coming to collect it. And then you arrest that person. I mean, come on.
We have,
I'm tired. I'm sorry, Stephen. You know, it really has become unbearable to hear them give all this information and not a single arrest. Remember the container with chicken that had drugs in it. Remember the container with juice tins that had cocaine in it.
But we've
not give all these examples.
Yeah, we've not gotten, you know, any finality to many of those issues.
Big seizures. And all you're arresting is the illegal guns, the illegal drugs. You can't arrest a single person. I'm totally unimpressed by the TTPS giving these statistics, and they have not one single person that they could arrest to show, well, okay, this is the person who's actually responsible. But they come out and trot out these statistics and these numbers.
Yeah, and I know,
make themselves look important.
I know a former prime minister talked about Mr. Big, and that's probably still relevant, you know, in Tobago.
Apparently, the elusive Mr. Big.
Okay, Mr. Joe, I know we're going to have a discussion specifically again in the new year about, you know, the criminal justice system. We'd probably leave that for the new year. But just, you know, getting back to Tobago as we're discussing this issue here, and you know, where we believe you know, the THA should be. You know, I'm wondering now, you know, asking whether we would see some maybe earth-shaking things happening within the THA. We have, of course, you know, these independents which have declared themselves independents, you know, within the THA. Do you see any other earth-shaking things that you can expect coming out of the THA going into 2023?
Well, we have 3 years to go. I mean, with this current term of office, 3 years is a very long time.
In politics, yes.
Yes. So
even in politics, because one day in
one way or the other. Yeah, one way or the other. we are going to see some things happen. I'm not sure what, I can't predict, but I don't think this dynamic is going to remain. I think there will be the need for them to actually organize themselves into some sort of political vehicle for some sort of public acceptance. There will be the continued calls, I guess, led by Mr. Duke and others, calling for new elections. Of course, whether that you will reach what I described as the tipping point, I can't say. But one way or the other, I think that we are still in for interesting times in Tobago and interesting times in Trinidad and Tobago.
All right. Well, we are almost towards the end of the program this evening. Our focus is really on Tobago and looking at, some of the challenges, reflecting on where we are, and of course, future prospects for the island. Mr. George, I know that it's almost, we're almost towards the end of the year, and I just want to give you just a few seconds to probably, just give a final comment. You may wish to, I don't know, you may have a greeting, what have you.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
I wish for Trinidad and Tobago, I wish that the peace, love, joy, and happiness of the Christmas season permeates our lives, our beings, our families, and all that we do throughout the new year. There is definitely a need for a sense of calm, a sense of decency, respect for fellow men, and that understanding which is encapsulated in our national watchwords, discipline, tolerance, and production. I hope to see that as part of our ethos going forward, because each one of us has a responsibility to build a better Trinidad and Tobago, and it starts with me, it starts with you, it starts with each and every one of us. And that's my wish for Trinidad and Tobago for the new year.
All right. So, George, thank you so much for being with us on the Citizens Community Forum this evening. Of course, we will be connecting with you in the new year. There's so many issues that, we have to address here, this in the social life of our country. And I think that, when we have these kinds of discussions, it only help to enlighten and educate people, so that we can be a better informed society and make better choices. And again, I want to thank you for being with us. This is not the first time that you've been on our program. You have been one of the staples, on the Citizens Community Forum for many months, and we always seek to get you in and get your perspectives on things community and national as well. Thank you so much for the support, and
always a pleasure, Stephen, and the very best to you and your staff. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was the Citizens Community Forum, and talking there with Mr. Martin George. The topic we were focusing on Tobago, reflections, challenges, and perspectives on the future of the THA. And of course, we will be continuing our discussion with many of our leaders within the society, getting their perspective on the country and the society, and we'll be talking with those people in the coming weeks on the Citizens Community Forum. So for now, I'm Stephen Cummings. That's our program. See you next Wednesday.
It was a famous poet who once said, "They came for the Jews, and I did not speak out, because I was not a Jew. Then they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me." Words there from famous poet Martin Niemöller, 1892 to 1984.